So this is take two. I've tried to make this video before and I either was having issues with my iMovie or YouTube, but whenever I uploaded, all the files looked corrupted. So here we go again. I want to talk about Linavelle's birth, and since I feel like the whole story, the whole journey of her life has to be told from the beginning till today. So around summer 2017, so around June, my husband and I had a trip planned to Dominican Republic to go visit my family and have some fun in the sun, as well as taking our two older children with us, Grayson and Caden, who were 1.5 and three and a half, yeah, at the time. So right before we left to our trip, my husband was going to go into Spain and Ibiza to play on a rugby tournament. And then he would catch a flight back to the States to meet me at my parents' in New York City. I was also using space available. So that meant we didn't have certain flight dates. It was whenever the flight popped up, if we had a space available, we would jump on that flight, head to the States. So we were going to miss each other probably like a day or two because a flight came up around the same time that he was still in Spain. And I told him that if that were the case, I was going to go ahead and jump on it because it's, less people to travel, the easier to travel it would be. So if he was by himself, it's a bigger possibility of him getting on a flight versus all four of us together. So I left shortly before he returned to our home in Italy, and then when he got back, he left to the States, and we met at my mother's and my father's in New York City, and we spent about 3 or 4 days there. I can't remember, maybe a week, and then we flew to Dominican Republic. And during those times, we had I rarely get periods when I'm breastfeeding, and I was still breastfeeding my 18-month-old. So I had one period right before he left to Spain and Ibiza, and we had sex right before he left. And when we got to New York, we had sex again. And then in Dominican Republic, early on our trip, we had sex again. So I don't know which of those times did it, but it was one of those. They were all within like a week or two of each other, so it wasn't like a month later or something. So I'm not sure if it was the first time or the third time or what it was. But we continued with our trip to Dominican Republic, and he spends 2 weeks there. I stay an extra 2 weeks with my mom. And I want to say it was towards the end of my third week in Dominican Republic. I was laying down on the bed breastfeeding Caden, and my nipple feels extremely sore. It feels like he's gnawing on it, and I was like, what is going on? And I was like, it's not his latch. Like, I unlatched him 3 times, and I kept feeling it, and I was like, this is so weird. I was like, whatever. And the next day it happened again, and finally it was like, oh shit, I've had this feeling before. I was like, last time I had this feeling, I was pregnant. And that was when I got pregnant with my second, Caden. I was still breastfeeding Grayson, my oldest. And as soon as I had the thought, I was like, I need to get a pregnancy test right now. And we were basically in a jungle. We were out in the middle of nowhere. We were a short drive from, the city, but we were in this place that the houses were all surrounded by trees. It didn't even have windows. It was kind of like bars with screens so the bugs wouldn't get in, but it was all opened to the outside, which was beautiful. You can listen to the sounds all day long of, nature outside. And there was a river that we can walk down to every day and have fun in. But so I was like, okay, I'm going to have to find an excuse to run into town and be able to buy a pregnancy test without taking my mother, because I didn't want to tell her yet, because I didn't even know. And I didn't want to, be in a bathroom with 2 kids trying to figure out how I was going to pee on a stick, whatever. So we had some neighbors across the way who were Canadian, and they didn't have a vehicle, so I offered them to give them a ride into the supermarket. So that day I went to the mom and I was like, hey, do you still want to get groceries? I was like, I was going to run into town to the supermarket if you want to come with. She's like, yeah, sure. So she comes along and her 2 children. And while they're doing their shopping, I picked up some stuff and bought it. And then there was a pharmacy inside the supermarket. So I took that chance to go into the pharmacy and buy myself a pregnancy test that cost about like $2, like $2 US. So I went to the bathroom right there in the supermarket, and I peed in the stick, and I wait about a minute, and I see the 2 pink lines pop up, and I was like, oh, just like I thought. I mean, I was okay with my 2 boys. I was not thinking of any children, at least not at that point. I felt like I was still, my youngest was still so young. But as soon as it happened, I went upstairs, and I was like, I need to tell my husband. I was like, because I think he was still in New York at the time, or he had just arrived back to Sicily. And I was like, I gotta tell him because it's gonna be another like week or 2 before I see him, and I don't want to hold it this long. So I called him, and I was like, oh yeah, so by the way, I'm pregnant. And he's like, what do you mean? And I was like, there's a baby in my stomach. I was like, I'm not sure how else to describe this. I'm pregnant. He's like, how do you know? And I was like, I just took a pregnancy test and the 2 pink lines. He's like, well, how do you know the test is not bad? I was like, well, because it's not just the test. I was like, I've been having, like the sore nipples. They're not going away. He was just as shocked as I was about the news. And, the more we talk about it, the more we're like, okay, can kind of see us having a 3rd child. I mean, we don't really have a choice now. It's going to happen anyway. I go back to New York with my mom, and I hadn't told her yet. So I bought the boys. I'm a big brother again. I'm a big brother in training shirts. And I had one of my friends do pictures of them, and I framed it for my mom. And when I gave them to her, I was like, oh yeah, like, here you go, Mom. She's like, oh, they look beautiful, thank you. And I was like, no, Mom, you gotta read the shirts. And she reads the shirt. She can't really see. She's like, I can't see what they say because the print looked small. So I had to read it for her, and she was still lost as to what's happening. So I had to like reiterate what the little one's shirt said. I said, Mom, it says that Caden's a brother in training. And it finally like hit her. She's like, oh, are you trying to say something? She's like, no. I was like, yeah, Mom, I'm pregnant. So they were very excited. My dad was very happy for us as well. And I told most of my family before I left back to Sicily during that trip. So when I get back home to Italy, I decide that I'm going to go check in with the doctor, mostly because we were living in a small community, and I didn't know myself, like, where I had to go get a birth certificate, as they helped me do that with my second, because usually you have to go, like, out in town where, I guess, the equivalent of a, vital statistic office in the United States, where you go report the birth of the child, and, they draft up a document, whatever, and then you wait at home and they send you a certificate. But anyways, because of all of that, I figured, if I just go to the hospital, start the process with them, if I decide I don't want to go to any more appointments, I won't. But by the time the baby's born, it's already in their system. It would be easier for me to then go to that office and have their help to be able to get that. And also because I had to go through the base as well to get their passports and social security number. Being in a different country, that all worked a little different than it does in the States. So I went into the first appointment, and I'm assuming I was anywhere from like 13 to 17 weeks by then. I wasn't sure, as I didn't know exactly when I got pregnant. And when I go and I tell the doctor all that, he's a bit shocked as to why I waited so long to get into his office. And, in my head, I'm thinking, well, why does it matter? Like, I wasn't going to do anything differently had I come in at 4 weeks. Like, I would have continued living my life the way I was up to that point, as I did even after I left the office that day. Like, I didn't change anything in my lifestyle because I saw him. So it's a bit frustrating that doctors think, pregnant woman, you need a doctor to check you. You need a doctor to see you, to tell you that everything is okay. Because never mind the woman's own intuition and the woman who has been living with her body for her entire life, knowing that better than the doctor. But, and I know not everyone feels that way, but that's the way I felt. I'm like, how are you going to tell me that I'm okay? Like, I know I am. I don't need you to tell me that. So that was like the first time that I was like, why am I here? Why am I doing this again? Why am I putting myself through these appointments if I know this is not where I'm going to come to birth anyway? But I know I gave my husband a peace of mind for me to get checked and to make sure that everything's okay. So I continued to go to the appointments because as soon as you finish one, they already, sign you up for the next one. So it's just like, okay, whatever. So I continued to go to about maybe like 24 weeks, 24 weeks. So according to them, I wasn't 17 weeks. I was only like 9 to 12. So I went for about a few months before I decided I had enough. Like, it just, every time I went in, it felt like the doctor was a bit annoyed by me and by my choices and by the things I declined. And I just got fed up, and I got to a point where I was like, okay, I am done with this. I'm not going to put myself through this anymore. So I was about 30 weeks when I finally start thinking about my birthing space and how I want to have this baby and how we're going to go about all this. And I had considered having a water birth with my first, and in the hospital they had told me, you can labor in the tub, but you're not going to have the baby in the tub. And I was like, well, then I don't want it, because what's the point of me being in this tub the whole time, and then when it's time to have the baby, I'm going to have to hop out. And with the second, I had attempted to have him in the water, but my bathtub was so narrow, it was extremely uncomfortable. So I was just like, yeah, no, I'm having him on the, on the ground. Screw the water. So now finally I'm like, okay, I want to have a water birth. So I started looking online, for birthing tubs, and they're either extremely expensive or I have to rent them. But there was nothing local because we're in Sicily, Italy. Like having babies at home is not, or at least that I didn't know the people who that was common to. So I looked for a kiddie pool, and I was like, okay, we can get a kiddie pool. But then I was like, then how am I going to get all the water out? And it's like, you have to buy all these extra parts. And we have an extremely small water tank. So then that was another factor that I was like, well, how am I going to keep the water warm if I'm in there for 2 to 4 hours or longer? Or who knows? So I was like, you know what? Too much logistics into that. I guess I'm having this baby on land too. And then I started thinking about that. And the house we lived in was brick and very, very cold. And this baby was due in March where it's still cold. So I was like, when, if the house is extremely cold, like, how are we going to heat it up? Where are we going to do this? I don't want to do it upstairs because if I have her upstairs, I'm not going to come down, and I'm not going to be able to, like, if I need to get food or get anything for myself. So I was considering just having her in the living room so I can access, the entire house from down there. But the more and more I think about this and go into my head about her birth, the more I'm like, I don't want to have her here. Like, I didn't feel good in the house. I didn't like the house. We had a bad relationship with my landlord, which probably plays a huge part into that. So I started looking into other options. I reached out to the farm, but they were booked. And, when I thought about that, I was like, I wouldn't do well birthing with midwives anyways. I was like, because I'd probably just tell them, I really don't want you here. Like, just go away and leave me alone. So I was like, I told my husband, I was like, I don't know what we're going to do, but I was like, I can't have this baby here. I was like, I just can't. He's like, well, what do you want me to do? I was like, I don't know. He had extended his contract an extra year. So we were supposed to leave June 2018. He extended it to leave June 2019. So I told him, I was like, I don't know, but you need to cancel that extension. I was like, because I can't stay here. I was like, and he's like, well, why don't you go back home and have your baby at your mom's? And I was like, I can't do that. Like, I would have to live there for at least a month before I feel comfortable traveling again. And I was like, and what am I going to do about my other 2 kids? I was like, and I can't take them with me because then I'm taking care of a newborn and 2 kids, and you're not going to be able to take a month off with me. And I was like, my parents work, so that, it's not like they're going to be there to help me. So I was like, I need to stay somewhere close to you where at least I have you to help me out. So I just, in my head, I just never envisioned, like, whenever I tried to, like, see my birth, see, like, envision, okay, this is how my birth is going to go down. I was never in the house. I was somewhere else. Like, I just wasn't there. Well, around January, I want to say, or December, I don't know how my husband pulled it off, but he ended up getting his extension canceled. So now we were due to leave June 2018. And I was like, okay, well, I guess that's, we're making traction. We're a little closer to what I want. But I was like, I want to get out of here before I have this baby. And the closer we get to it, the more it seems possible. So now, because we had missed our window to choose when we were leaving, where we were going to next. Usually the Navy gives you anywhere from like 6 months to a year to choose your next duty station. And since my husband missed that window because he had that extension, now he was up for orders again. So he starts speaking to a detailer who is the person that's helping him choose these orders, like telling him, this is what is available, where do you want to go? Well, during one of those phone calls, he comes home and he tells me, he's like, hey, I spoke to my detailer today, and he said that if you guys really want to get out of here, he can pull it off, before the baby comes, because after the baby comes, it would take anywhere from 2 to 3 months for us to receive all the documentation to be able to fly back to the States. And I was like, if he can get us out of here before this baby is born, I would be forever grateful, like, make it happen. And I want to say a week after we told him, we woke up and my husband had orders in his emails, like we had to leave. So I already had a date for us to fly out and where we were going. And I was amazed because I didn't think it was going to happen that fast, and it did. So we received orders February 7th, and we were due to leave the 22nd or the 23rd. We had a flight that we were ready to go back to the United States. So my husband chose a ship in Virginia Beach, or Norfolk. So we moved to Virginia Beach. And it was craziness. It was like 2 weeks of madness. We had to pack up our house. We had to ship our car back to the States. We had to sell our second car that we had bought out there that we didn't want to, pay to bring it back to the States because the Navy only pays for one vehicle. It was like all these things had to happen, but we made it happen in 2 weeks, and we moved to Virginia Beach, Virginia. And when we arrived here, the Navy gives us 10 days to live in the hotel until we need to start paying out of pocket. And because we didn't have that much time and we didn't know the area, we didn't want to rush into a home, so we started looking at apartments. And we finally find a place that we like after, going to different places. We also had to buy a new car because our family was growing and we only had one vehicle. And all these little things have to happen within 10 days, and I'm heavily pregnant. My husband gets sick. Like, all this craziness happening. But we find a place. We settle in. We still have no furniture. It was about 3 weeks before or 2 weeks. I think it was like 2 weeks of living with no furniture, no anything. We bought a bed, though, because we didn't have a bed. So we had a bed, thankfully. And this whole time, I'm just like, baby can come right now. And we have nothing. Like, we have, loaner pots and pans. We had a few, like, loaner pots and pans. And we have a bed. I was like, we have nothing else. I was like, oh, well, all you really need for a baby is towels. Like, everything else will figure itself out. So I stayed calm and just waiting. And eventually our stuff came. And we got to settle all that stuff in. And I want to say it was like a week after our stuff came, I went into labor. So funny enough, when I go into labor, usually my last month of pregnancy, I do not want to do anything sexual. Like, sex is a huge turn off because I feel huge, out of breath, I'm exhausted, I'm barely sleeping, and with 2 other kids, it's just like not something I'm thinking about. But this night, I remember we had sex around midnight or something like that. And I wake up at 4 in the morning and I don't know what it was, but I just wanted to touch my husband and caress him, and that leads to another session. And right after we finish, I go clean up and I lay back down, and I'm laying on my side, and I'm feeling wetness between my legs, and I'm like, okay, I just cleaned up. Like, what is this? So I'm like, hey, can you pass me my tank top off the floor so I can clean myself up? And I do, and as I'm wiping, I feel like it just keeps coming out. I'm like, okay, this is ridiculous. I'm going to the bathroom to clean up because I don't know why I'm like just leaking all this stuff. So I go to the bathroom, and as soon as I sit on the toilet, I hear this loud like plop sound. And when I look down, I'm like, oh snap, I'm in labor. It was my mucus plug, and it was bloody. And I tell my husband, I was like, oh, you might want to call your work because you're not going in today. He's like, what do you mean? I was like, we're having a baby. And he rushes into the bathroom. He's like, how do you know? And I'm like, well, look at the toilet. I was like, that's my mucus plug. And by this point, I'm starting to have more like bloody showing and water come down my thighs. So I tell him, let's start getting the bathroom ready. I need you to clean the tub. Go start heating up some water. I texted my photographer in the meantime, which thankfully I found her. Like, it was last minute. I had been searching. Once we found out we were coming to Virginia, I started searching right away because I knew I wanted somebody to document this birth, as I love having the video of my second. And I wanted to video this birth too, but the camera had gotten messed up, water damage. So I was like, well, at least pictures, like, I can print them, I can have them forever. And I didn't want my husband having that job because I wanted him to be there to support me and help me if I needed him to get me something or, deal with the kids versus him taking video or pictures. So I wanted a photographer there. And I found her, and thankfully she was all on board for the free birth, which is a huge thing. Not a lot of people want to be there when you're having a free birth because they feel like if something goes wrong, you're going to blame them. But the thing about free birth is that, the woman birthing takes full responsibility for anything that happens. That we are the authority figure, not anybody else. So, once she was like, yeah, I've been to a free birth before, I was like, awesome. And we got to do maternity photos with this pregnancy, I didn't think we would be able to do maternity photos because in Sicily, I wasn't going to do them at all. And once we got here, I didn't think I would even have time to find a photographer and do them. I thought I was like, we're going to get there and I'm going to have the baby right away. So we got to do them, which I was excited. I'm happy that got to happen. And I got to meet her, and that assured me, like, I did want her there. And, she had great energy. We got along well, and it was awesome. So after I texted her, I thought about it. I was like, let me call her because she's sleeping. She has 2 kids. It's going to take her a little while to get ready and head over my way. And I had spoken to her previously, as she had told me that getting babysitters here is sometimes a hassle. And I said, if anything, just bring the kids. Like, I have 2 kids. They'll all just sit together and play or whatever. Like, it doesn't matter. Just bring your kids. I was like, it's not going to bother me. So she calls me about like 30 minutes after and says, hey, the babysitter, canceled on me. She won't take the kids. And I was like, just bring them. I was like, I want you to be here. I was like, it doesn't matter. I was like, just bring the kids. I really don't want you to miss this. And at this point, like, I feel things are moving along. But in my head, I had pictured, a 4 to 6 hour labor. Like, that's what I told myself. I was like, as long as she comes in 4 hours, like, we're good. Like, I want a short, sweet labor. My previous had been 12. The one after that had been 7 hours. So I was like, I had a lot of Braxton Hicks with this and a lot of predominant labor. So I was like, this girl's coming fast. So in my head, I was like, 4 hours. Well, when it came down to it, she was here in 2. So I started labor at 5 a.m. on the dot, and by 7:10, she was here. So in my head, though, I'm still like, oh, it's a while to go. So my photographer gets here around 6 in the morning, and I was already in the tub, and I was just relaxing, and I could still chit-chat. So we started talking, and I want to say we talked for about 20, 30 minutes. And then finally, I just shut down. Like, I had to go close my eyes and just go into myself because that's when labor started getting more intense. And as it continues. My husband keeps coming in and out, and he was like getting the pots of water and getting water for myself and all this. But his in and out is just interrupting me, and it's annoying me. So I was like, hey, I don't know what you're doing. I need you to stay inside the bathroom. I was like, I don't want you coming in and out. Like, every time he came in and out, it distracted my mind from what I was focusing on, which is mostly, breathing and relaxing. My body's doing all the work. So he finally sits down and stays inside with me, and I feel better at that point to kind of concentrate on myself, because it was just a distraction, like in, out, and I'm like, okay, I'm laboring. I'm like, wait, what's going on? Why is he coming in? Why is he going out? It's getting to a point where I was like, okay, I feel the bag's bulging. Her head is really close. And a few contractions later, I feel my water break. And I was inside the water, and my husband's like, how do you know it broke? And I was like, it feels like a pop. And it slightly hurts when I felt it. So I was like, yeah, it kind of hurt. And I was like, it felt like a pop. I was like, I'm pretty sure my water broke. And 2 contractions later, her head starts emerging. Once the head comes out and I feel the ring of fire, after it gets to the neck, it releases that tension, so it doesn't feel as bad. But with her, I felt like her face was still inside, because I felt that tension for a lot longer and the ring of fire for a lot longer. I wail and I get out of the water, because I was like, what is that feeling? And as I do that, I realize that getting out of the water felt 100 times worse. So I tell myself, I'm like, relax, just breathe, get back into the water. So I do that, get back into the water, and I'm breathing, and I'm feeling the next contraction build up. And I was like, okay, on this one, I need to really breathe through it and slowly bear down so she can finish coming out, because this feeling is not good. So that's what I do in this next contraction. I just lower myself back into the water, and I'm taking deep breaths, and I slowly give a slight push, and she comes flying out, and I feel her. My husband's like, she's in the water, and I'm like, in my head, I'm like, I know. And I look down, and I slowly bring her up to my chest, and I'm just looking at her and marveling at this moment. Like, that moment, it's like a pause, like your body, your brain just pauses, and I just wanted to enjoy the moment and see what was happening. And I slowly bring her up to my chest, and in the midst of that, I remember that my oldest son has said, hey mom, I really want to be there. I want to see Linavelle being born. So I was like, hey, hurry, go to the room, wake up Grayson, because both of my kids slept through the entire thing. And I was like, even though the bathroom and the room were connected, they apparently didn't hear anything. The noise didn't bother them. So in that point, my husband goes and gets Grayson. And my mom was also in the house. She also slept through it. She was in a different bedroom and didn't hear anything until after she was born. My oldest one ran to her and told her, Abuelita, my sister's here. She was born. And my mom was like, what? So she showered and came over and met her shortly after. But I've always wanted to share her birth story and her pictures, because more women need to know that we all can birth the way we want. We all have this inside us, this power to birth whichever way makes us happy. We shouldn't let a provider determine, the way we feel about our bodies and what's safe and what isn't. Like, if that's the way you feel more comfortable, by all means, go to your doctor. I'm not saying free birth is for everyone, because it's not. But if you're a woman who feels like, I can take charge of my own birth, I'm willing to do the research, I'm willing to learn, I'm willing to trust in myself and the thousands of women who've done this before me, hundreds of thousands of women who've done this before me. Like, we don't need to do anything to birth a child other than to get out of the way. Our bodies already know what to do and how to do it. And all we have to do is take a step back and allow our bodies to do the work. So I'm going to share some pictures of Linavelle throughout her last year of her life and up to today.